Welcome back, and so we're joined for our first conversation by Ms. Dolores Balderamos Garcia to talk to us about an overview of the NGO Act Regulations. Good morning. How are you? Welcome.
Good morning, young people. And it's great to be here. It's absolutely delightful. I'm not usually out of my house so early.
I was gonna
but
ask.
I can tell you that the sunrise was gorgeous. I don't see it all the time, you know.
Nice,
I know
nice,
we get that.
yes.
We get that a lot. When you don't
Yes.
normally get up so early, but when you're fairing it, it's okay.
And
very
it's good to be here, and we can talk about this topic this
Yes,
morning.
for
You
sure.
know.
As I was mentioning to my co-host this morning and to our viewers at home, the topic of the NGO Act is rather timely, seeing as though there has been quite a number of significant changes recently, including the election of the 13th senator and all that has happened last week, in a sense, stymieing his appointment, is it, to upper parliament. So we would want to begin by asking you to share with us an overview of what this act is and what it encompasses.
Yeah, I'd be more than happy to. And I would like to really, I like to go really back to basics. And I would like to start with the Constitution of Belize.
Yeah.
And the preamble to the Constitution, which is a lovely set of words, and I highly recommend them to anybody, talks about the fact that we believe that the will of the people shall form the basis of government in a democratic society. And more importantly, that all persons may play some part in the institutions of national life. What is this talking about? It's talking about participation and inclusion.
Yeah.
So let's start there. Now, when we go to the act itself, I'm not blowing anybody's horn, but I must acknowledge the forward vision of the Musa administration of the time, of which I was a little part. And the Non-Governmental Organizations Act came about around 99-2000. And it was this forward-thinking vision of inclusion and participation, according to the Belize Constitution, that promulgated this piece of legislation. I don't know who actually drafted it, but maybe I need to go and find that out. But it's a lovely piece of legislation. And before I even talk about what exactly an NGO is, I would like to say to you that there is talk in this piece of legislation in Section 7 about sustainable human development. Now that was forward thinking because we had the Millennium Development Goals from 2000 to 2015, and now we're in the era of the Sustainable Development
SDGs.
Goals and objectives.
Yeah.
And so this, we're talking about this having been drafted 98, 99 in there. And sustainable human development can be defined, and it goes on, but it talks about respect for human rights.
Yeah.
It talks about promoting the educational system, an entity that has programs and activities which educates the Belizean public on the Constitution and their legal rights, promoting the benefit of marginalized groups like women and youth, conservation of the natural environment, the rights of workers, healthcare, income generation, patriotism and ethnic identity, cultural promotion, and this is the one I like, K, the participation of women in all spheres of national development, and that promotes gender awareness issues and sensitivity, microcredit schemes, environment, and of course everything else.
Yeah.
So, sustainable human development. Now, what is an NGO? In answer to this nice young man here with his yellow shirt on this morning. An NGO, and best to read, no problem. I used to be a teacher, you know.
Oh, I can test.
Yes. An NGO is a legal entity formed as a company limited by guarantee under the Companies Act, whose aims and objectives are consistent with the principles enshrined in the preamble to the Belize Constitution. You see why I started there?
Yeah.
And the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and all those international and regional human rights treaties and instruments to which Belize is a party, and are designated. So remember, the aims, nature, and objects, whether direct or indirect, of an NGO, those objectives are designed to contribute to sustainable human development. All right, now, a company limited by a guarantee. Well, a company is a legal entity which is separate from an individual. So Mr. Osmani Salas is not an NGO. An NGO is not Mr. Osmani Salas. So a company is a separate legal entity. I remember writing my company law paper way back 30 odd years ago. Why is it good to have a separate legal entity? Well, it's good to do business because then your company is limited by shares, right? So your shares in the company, in a business company, will determine the extent of your interest and also of your liability.
Yeah.
But a company limited by guarantee is really a company that is not for profit, and also the guarantee is that of the signatories. So if me, you, and you, three of us, want to form a company limited by guarantee, then we will attach our names to the memorandum and articles of association, and then our guarantee is to the extent of our interest. So it would be 1/3 apiece. And so if we rent a place and after 2 months we can't pay the rent and we owe, then they come to me for 1/3, and they come to you all for the other 2/3. You know? So limited by guarantee and not for profit.
Yeah.
That is key in terms of what an NGO is. No, stop me and ask.
Yeah, I
Yes,
want to interject right there because,
yes.
of course, there are a lot of different organizations across Belize. They may not be registered as an NGO, but they're doing the work that typical people would would typically consider as NGO work. How would you encourage them to make this step to becoming official? Because what they were doing right now is probably very viable. People are recognizing it. It might not be legally recognized as a establishment, but they're making strides. So how do you encourage them to make that transition?
Well, you can have a community-based organization, but I believe that the benefit that would inure to a group of people coming together to actually form an NGO would be that you can actually put all your slots right into the act. And being able to work along with the act so that you will be not only recognized, but you can contribute in a particular way. And let me jump and say, the kind of little knee-jerk reaction that occurred with the government, and I call it a knee-jerk reaction. We're not getting partisan political in our talking, but that little bit of amendment that was done last week in the Senate, I call it a bit of a knee-jerk reaction because to me, what that law did was it didn't say Mr. Salas can't be the 13th senator, but it did say in a kind of an ambiguous way really, which I think was pointed out, you know, by the opposition senators. It says no entity other than an NGO registered under this act can either on its own account or in association with any other person represent the interests of an NGO. What they were trying to do is before Mr. Salas took his seat, they were trying to say, your NGO has to be registered, right? But remember, Mr. Salas is not an entity. The entity is the NGO. And they were trying to cover that little hole, but really they ought to have looked at the whole of the act in its entirety to see if there's anything else that needs to be changed. No, it's a good law.
Can that be viewed then as
it can be
semantic?
A little bit onerous. Go ahead.
Can that be viewed as semantic if they're looking at what the individual is versus the NGO? In that context? No.
What I am thinking is that without realizing it, they might have said, well, an NGO can't have attorneys because attorneys wouldn't be able to represent the NGO if you're not registered. But what they meant to do, and they did it and this is why I say it was a little bit of a knee-jerk reaction, because of the advent of the 13th senator, which really should have happened long ago, you know. The 6th Amendment to the Constitution providing for a 13th senator happened almost 9 years ago now. Almost 9 years ago. So always this whole business of working the NGO Act and having NGOs, it's a work in progress. People's participation under the Constitution and people being able to come together. Let me give you an example of what I felt very proud of. I happen to be on the board of BCVI, the Belize Council for the Visually Impaired, and I'm very proud to serve on that board because that is an NGO that works.
Yeah.
And when our organization put forward Donovan Renault's name as our nominee for senator, my heart swelled with pride. Donovan, well, everybody know Donovan. I mean, he can really defend himself. He can talk. He can express himself. He can represent people, and he's aware of what is happening in the community. And just the fact that he was participating, and that his name went into the box to be voted on as the 13th senator. Never mind that somebody else was elected, but I think his participation was key. He's a person with a disability to represent, and I was so proud to have seen his name go in and for him to have said, look, I am willing to serve. That is excellent for the development of Belizean democracy.
I had the opportunity of interviewing Donovan ahead of the elections for the 13th senator, and in speaking with him, one of the things that I found interesting and for me a bit overwhelming when I sat there and listened to him express his thoughts and his views is that while he admitted that even if he were elected to become the 13th senator, he would not have been able to necessarily fill Philip Golson's shoe as an equally blind person. But in terms of preparing oneself for that challenge and the work that lies ahead in terms of representing other NGOs, I found that to be quite interesting. And to me, the takeaway was that it's about equal representation. The fact that you have someone with a disability being able to be selected as a candidate shows that there's diversity within at least the NGO community.
Right. So, and you know, I think the lesson is there that there must be inclusion. And you know what? I think that governments need, going forward in the development of our democracy, we need to see NGOs and people who are willing to organize in this way to have a separate legal entity, limited by a guarantee, non-profit, objectives for sustainable human development, to see these organizations as partners, as opposed to antagonists. The knee-jerk reaction of this little amendment that was made showed that government is still seeing people out there as we and they. We in a power, they need to stay within they. We don't want them to have too much because then it will stymie what we are trying to do, rather than see the fact that even the preamble to the Constitution of Belize calls for participation and inclusion. Now, may I go ahead with the definitions and with what the Act tells us? Now, what are the attributes or characteristics of an NGO? It shall be independent of government control. That goes without saying, not true, but it's there. It's actually stated, which is excellent. Not a governmental thing, not a political thing, at least not a partisan one. And its aims and objectives must work to achieve sustainable human development on a voluntary, non-profit basis. Now that doesn't mean to say people can't earn a salary, you know. Because I think BCBI has about 30 employees, and it is a big organization now, you know. And it has a board of directors. It has a board of directors. I believe that, not singling them out for any negative reason or anything, but something for us to consider. My understanding is that Oceana has a Belizean vice president, but they don't have a local board of directors, whereas this act calls for every NGO registered in Belize to have a Belizean board of directors.
That was called to question with Janelle Chanona's nomination as a candidate. That there were people who were questioning either the validity validity of that nomination based on those very principles.
Precisely, because really, if you're going to come under the Act, then you need to follow what it says.
Yeah.
You know, and clearly, there must be a board of directors. For instance, Mrs. Musa and Carla Ayers Musa and all the folks at BCVI, they aren't, you know, laws unto themselves. They call regular board meetings. I am there along with our other directors, and we have a very good oversight of what is happening. There have been challenges over the years. Some of the funding has dried up, but the Eyeglasses program has done wonders for the sustainability of the organization. And talk about an organization that is geared towards sustainable human development. The services that are given, you know, the working with visually impaired children, blind children, and everything.
And I think that could be your gauge when you know that the population is absolutely benefiting from whatever services or
fantastic benefits all over the country, you know. And so it's not for profit. And of course, we saw the Section 4. They repealed Section 4 of the existing law, which says that no NGO shall enjoy any tax benefits provided under this Act unless it is registered. But then they went on to say not only that, but that you have to be registered under the Act in order to make representation, right? But remember, Mr. Salas isn't an entity; he's an individual. But the entity of which he is a member and an executive person has to be registered now under the Act and in good standing. That was the wording that was being used by the people in the NGO steering committee. NGOs in good standing in order for him and his organization to be the voice in the Senate for the NGO community.
In other words, we know that he represents the Belize Tourism Industry Association. So BTIA would have to be in compliance with all the rules, requirements that govern the Act.
Precisely,
right?
precisely.
And then that would make him then eligible to be able to represent the NGO, the entire NGO community.
Precisely. And this is where it's a little bit difficult for some of the smaller NGOs, because in addition to having to submit to the Solicitor General's office all your paperwork, you have to put your audited accounts. If your income of an NGO is over $25,000, that's the threshold. So it talks about audited accounts having to go in. If your revenues and grants of your NGO are at least $25,000 or more, and then if it's under $25,000, like a tiny little organization, then at least your statement of accounts. So audited accounts, when your threshold is $25,000, and then below $25,000 for your income and revenue, then at least a statement of accounts. But you have to submit your memorandum and articles, your name and address of your organization, details of your aims and objectives and purposes, your organizational structure, your accounting procedures. It is a lot. It is a lot. And as a matter of fact, in talking with members of the NGO steering committee, in particular Froilat Salam, she says that this is the challenge that a lot of the NGOs are facing. However, Jamie, I wouldn't discourage smaller groups from being for getting on the up and up in relation to complying with the requirements of the Act, because then it can only strengthen the NGO community. The more NGOs that you have that are compliant, then the stronger that voice of the 13th senator will be in the Senate.
I was going to ask right then, so if you aren't compliant as it relates to the terms of the Act, then is it the case that your voice cannot be heard?
No, because there's nothing that said that Mr. Salas can't represent all NGOs. But remember, to be in good standing, you have to be compliant with these regulations. And one of the main things that you have to do is report your financial status. We have difficulty in Belize with financial status, you know.
Yeah.
But it is something we have to work on.
Yeah.
It is something we have to work on.
sure.
Because you can't be using people money. I mean, somebody
And not
money
be
has to come from
accountable, yeah.
right. The money has to come from somewhere.
Yeah.
But the lesson I think to be learned so far through this whole 13th Senator process is that democracy is always a work in progress,
Yeah.
and the NGO community, if they so desire and if they really would like to do so, can have a very, very strong voice.
Can I stick
Can
up
have
in-
a strong
yeah.
voice.
Can I stick up in there and ask a few questions
Sure.
before we proceed?
Sure. I will see if I
One
can
of
answer
my one of the things that strikes me as interesting or curious is the fact that you have, in my opinion and in my limited view, and I'll be honest about that, it seems to be that a number of NGOs keep popping up and going in. You hear about them for a while and then they go defunct. How does that fit into the general picture, one? And secondly, when it comes to the survival or the viability of the NGOs, the respective NGOs, they depend a lot on grants and donor fundings and that sort of stuff. What happens in a situation where the donor requests to be anonymous in the face of what you're mentioning, that they need to be accountable in terms of their source of funding and what have you? I have $1 million that I would want to donate to charity. I'll go through any one of these many NGOs and say, okay, I'll put my $1 million there, but I don't want to be named as the donor. How does that affect how they are able to prepare their books and what have you?
Well, I don't see anything in here that says that you have to reveal every single person or entity that gives you money. What it is saying is that you have to reveal how much you have.
Okay.
Right.
Right?
Because
and
you have
yes, because you
fundraisers.
have to operate.
Yeah.
Right? Now the tiny groups that pop up and then when you look they're gone and that kind of thing. Well, the proof will be, they always say the proof of the pudding is
In the
when you
eating.
eat it. So the proof of an NGO will be how sustainable it is and whether it has been able to contribute and remain viable because it is willing to go through all of this.
Yeah.
You see, there were what, 29? There were actually was even less of the NGOs that were in good standing and therefore had a vote.
Yeah. I think
When-
it was reduced to 28. if
Yes,
I'm
it
not
was some.
mistaken.
It was not very many, but 100 and odd are registered. 140 odd, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct.
But the challenge is the reporting where it comes to financials, and I guess this is something that we as Belizeans will just have to work on, because clearly the law is saying, okay, we spoke about sustainable human development. Now the act said that you have to report. Without more, you should report to the Ministry of Human Development. And by the way, back in 98 to 2003, at one point I was the Minister of Human Development, Women and Civil Society. So again, a signal from the Musa administration that we felt that the contribution and participation of civil society was very important. So many years later, and we're just getting the 13th senator, you see? But right now, when you put in all your financials and everything, your board and everything, that goes now to the Solicitor General's office, and that is my understanding of it. And the then Attorney General, Vanessa Retriege, she's no longer, but she made it clear to the NGO Steering Committee, to my understanding, that government wouldn't interfere in how they run their affairs.
Yeah.
They only wanted to know that people were in good standing in order to be able to elect the 13th senator, and then, like I said, a little knee-jerk act. But we saw what the object of it was. You have to be registered under the act. And that's not such a bad thing, because there are tax exemptions. There's an income tax exemption in here, but you can also apply for exemption of business tax and the, I don't know if you can apply for exemption of environmental tax, but you can apply. See, it says, every NGO registered under this act shall be exempt from the payment of income tax, but subject to the provisions and regulations made under subsection 3, they may apply to the Minister of Finance to be exempted from the payment of business tax or any other tax, duty or impost levied by the government from time to time. So it leaves the door open. If you want to run your organization well, you can get the benefits. We are challenged because in Belize we have been very dependent on external donor funding, right? Again, I go back to BCVI, that's the little NGO that can, like the little train, what they call it, little train that can. There's been good leadership. There's been good, sound leadership. And there's also been the ability to kind of shift when the winds are blowing in a particular direction, but becoming strong. Being able to have self-help, being able to pull up your own socks and say, look, all right, if Sight Savers International or if some other international organization is maybe not giving as much money as they used to, then what can we do? And like I say, BCVI's answer has been the eyeglasses program, because you can go to Courts and get a fancy eyeglasses, and then by the time you finish pay for it, you've paid for 3 pair, Or you can go to BCVI, and you see whose horn I'm blowing here, right? Or you can go to BCVI. There might not be designer frame and all of that, but not only do you get an eye test and the glasses, but they could tell you if you have cataract, or if you're getting glaucoma or something like that. And it is those kinds of services that are important, And so you raise your money, you do your work, it contributes to the sustainable human development, and everybody benefit.
Can you then talk a little bit about what are some of the gaps that the other 70, 80 odd NGOs are missing? Because it's quite unfortunate that you have so many registered, but they aren't compliant. There's clearly something.
Yes. I think that it's a couple of things. Well, leadership I spoke about. Because people have to be very committed. You see, in Belize we aren't rich, I mean, over 40% poverty. And our tax base, young lady and young gentleman, our tax base is so paltry. And now they're talking about increasing taxes. I just scratch my head. How the tiny tax base will cover a rise in taxes? You'll have diminishing returns. So what am I talking about? I'm saying that in Belize, we don't have the huge economy of scale for people to be able to form an NGO. You might have an excellent idea, and you might say, this is the NGO that I'm going to form, but you have to remember what you're going to do about your funding tomorrow. You see, those are the challenges that we have. But I am not lamenting. I am saying that the steering committee, who have shown that they are quite capable, can encourage the others to, you don't have to be huge, but you can get a friend. You work on your little statement of accounts if you don't earn more than $25,000 a year. If you do earn more than 25, I'm sure that there are accountants that would come, and not for a mint of money. They would say, let us help you with your audit. And really, it is being accountable. It's being accountable. Again, you don't have to say, Michael Ashcroft, give me so much, or Donald Trump, give me so much, but being able to say, look, you have to have money to operate.
I have concerns.
But at the
same
time, you are willing to say, this is how we have spent it. Because if you are non-profit, you are non-profit. Anyway, tell me what your concerns.
I have serious concerns about the fact that you don't necessarily have to disclose your source of funding. You just have to be accountable for the amount that you have and how you're spending it.
Yes, sir.
My concern is we're living in a society where, for instance, you have people who deal in the underworld. They either deal in criminal activities of one sort or another, and they can then easily be able to finance an NGO, for instance. And this is not money laundering, because that would imply them getting a return for siphoning their money through there. But I'm saying, I'll use myself as an example just for illustration.
It will be money laundering, though, but let me not.
You go ahead.
You go ahead.
What I'm saying is, for instance, if I am a drug dealer and my wife has an NGO or is a part of she's a member of an NGO, and I say, you know what, they're struggling, let me give them $500,000. My understanding from what you're explaining is the government or the laws aren't necessarily concerned about the source of the money, because my money would be illicit funds.
No, but
right?
not under this act.
Okay.
But clearly other laws. And I mean, now we have the Financial Intelligence Unit, we have all kinds of, yes.
Now I'm
Please,
understanding.
I'm just saying under this act, it doesn't talk about that, but please, we operate in an increasingly penned-in society now. The banks want to know, you can even put in more than how much without declaring exactly where that has come from. So please, it's not that we don't have those laws and regulations. As a matter of fact, Belize is suffering because of the de-risking of so many people in the banking system now. You know, the Minister of Finance of Trinidad and Tobago, and it's a shame, it gives Belize a black eye. Well, so many things giving us black eye these days, it's not funny.
Too numerous.
But the Minister of Finance of Trinidad and Tobago stood up in their parliament and said, please, let's pass this law because we don't want to get like Belize. So they were using us as look at what is happening to poor Belize because we have not been able to satisfy all the requirements of the other legislations. But please, nobody could ever sit and say that it is not important for us to be completely transparent when it comes to funding and that kind of thing. But you see, how you operate is something that is important. Because look at the amounts of activities that you can get involved in for sustainable human development. It's amazing. And so we have to have words of encouragement. We must have words of encouragement, you know. And I just also wanted to mention a couple of things. And this I got from talking with the members of the NGO steering committee, that NGOs need to be grassroots driven as opposed to donor driven. You need donors, yes. But if you are grassroots driven and you can find ways of raising your little funding, then you don't have to be dependent on Mr. So-and-so or Miss So-and-so.
And you'll find that's the reason why a lot of NGOs go in, because they're heavily reliant on their donors. So when the donors go, the NGO goes, the work goes.
Yes. I mean, and you know, we live in a world that is so uneven and unbalanced.
For sure.
You know, they say that the 8 richest people in the world have enough assets, or have as much assets as half of the world's entire population, you know.
I read that the other day and I was surprised.
Bill Gates may become the first trillionaire.
I read that too and I was surprised. Yes, 25 years.
We pick up, we pick up these little bits of trivia, but it is important. It is important for us to look at. So NGOs, the word of encouragement is grassroots driven. Ground-based driven, as opposed to depending on monies coming in. You know?
We gotta wind down this conversation.
Yes.
But I'd like for you to bring everything full circle
together,
insofar as it concerns Osmani Salas being the 13th senator-elect. How does the NGO Act and how does everything that has transpired over the past 3 weeks per se come together?
Okay. Well, good steps forward, I would say. It's about high time. It's about high time because the law was passed so many years ago. Good steps forward. Casting the eye on the NGO community and having that focus on them, that they can't be running now. They have to say, look, I need to get myself on the up and up. I need to be in compliance with the requirements of the Act in terms of filing my paperwork, filing my accounts, putting in who is my board, you're making sure that I have completely complied. You see, that spotlight on the NGO community, to me, it can only be good. Because when you shine a light on something, like a cockroach they start to run out, and you know, you open your closet and you give a cockroach notice, that kind of thing, it can only come to the good of the community. And government because a 13th senator will be there, will be required at least to be more transparent in how they bring things forward. You see, because I mean, if you have an uneven number, then you can be outvoted. If you're bringing something, I always remember former leader of the People's United Party, Francis Fonseca, saying, why shouldn't we have a 13th person? If you have a law that you want to bring forward and you can't convince 7 people, is 7 the majority number is, you have to be able to convince 7 people that what you are doing is okay. Maybe the other 6 might be taking a certain partisan political approach. But when you bring your laws, if it is going to be good and if it is going to be for sustainable human development, then you ought to be able to bring people along. And like I say, we have to look at things in a participatory way, and we have to look at things in an inclusiveness way. And I think maybe that is where I would bring it in. Mr. Salas has his work cut out for him, and I can tell you from the comments that I have heard and from knowing him, I believe that he will take his work very seriously and encourage the steering committee to grow from strength to strength, to encourage the other NGOs to come in and to come together. And I take this opportunity as well to say hats off to people like Froila. You know, she is down there, her hands full with her organization there, with Guatemala taking over the southern part of our country. Please ask me to come back, because listen to me, we have to talk about women. We have to talk about the protection of children. There's so much to talk about. I think Ms. Daniels had said we have to have a women's conversation. But to wrap up, I think that the lesson from what has happened recently is that we have to take governance seriously. And governance is not only listening to Dean Barrow, you know, because he has had his say, and he is having his day, you know. But governance is the participation of people who are willing to put their money where their mouth is. And you can put your money where your mouth is by taking the reporting requirement seriously and taking governance seriously, so that we can all participate to make Belize a better place. That is how I would wrap up the conversation today. You know?
That's it. Well, we want to thank you for joining us for this conversation. It was very informative. It's very opened my eyes to a lot of things, and hopefully to you, the public, as well. So we thank you very much for your
no
for
trouble,
here.
and continue doing a wonderful job.
Thank you.
I'm happy to see the young people come forward. All right.
So we are going to take a really quick break, and when we come back, we're going to be joined by representatives from the Customs Department to tell us about their upcoming Customs Day. So stay tuned.